All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to take a crash course on the rules of life itself. We're going on a high-speed journey to understand how everything on our planet is organized, how it's all connected, and, how surprisingly fragile it can be.
So let me start with a question. What in the world connects one single oak tree to 120,000 tiny little aphids? It sounds kind of like a riddle, right? But the answer to this question, it actually reveals the fundamental rules of nature. It's all about how energy and life are structured, and trust me, it's not always as simple as you'd think. So keep that image in your head.
So, first things first, what are we even talking about here? Well, an ecosystem is basically a community of living things interacting with all the non-living stuff around them. Think about it. It could be as small as a pond with its fish, its plants, the water, the sunlight, the mud, or it could be as huge as a mangrove swamp. It's that mix of the living, what we call the biotic parts, and the non-living, the abiotic parts, that makes the whole system tick. Now, our story really begins with the most basic transaction in all of nature, the flow of energy. I mean, if you want to understand any ecosystem, you've got to follow the money. Or in this case, you got to follow the energy. And that all starts with one simple question.
So, how does that energy actually get from point A to point B in a forest or a field? Well, it moves along these pathways that we call food chains. This is the simple, straight line that energy takes as one organism gets eaten by another. It's pretty much the who eats whom of the entire natural world.
Let's just break down the rules here. It's pretty straightforward. At the very bottom, you've got your producer, in this case, grass, making its own food from sunlight, super important. Then you have a primary consumer, like this grasshopper, that comes along and eats the grass. And finally, a secondary consumer, say a lizard, comes and eats the grasshopper. Each of these steps is what we call a trophic level, and those arrows, they just show you which way the energy is flowing, up. Okay, that seems easy enough, right? You might think you can just count all the organisms at each level and get a nice, neat picture of how things are structured. But what happens when you go back to our oak tree? You know, the one with the 120,000 aphids? If you just count them, you get a really, really weird picture.
And this is where it gets a little tricky. See, if you just count the individuals, your pyramid of numbers looks completely upside down. You've got one single tree on the bottom supporting thousands and thousands of aphids on top. That's totally misleading. A much, much better way to look at it is with a pyramid of biomass. This measures the total weight of all the living things at each level. And guess what? That pyramid is never upside down. The total mass of the producers at the bottom is always way, way bigger than the mass of whatever it supports above it. And this pyramid shape reveals the most fundamental rule of energy transfer. It is incredibly inefficient. As energy moves up the food chain, a huge amount of it just gets lost. Think about it. A rabbit doesn't eat the roots of the grass, right? And it can't even digest all the parts it does eat. Plus, it's burning energy just to stay alive, running around, breathing. This massive loss at every single step is the simple reason why there are always fewer predators at the top than there is prey at the bottom. Okay, so we've established that energy flows through an ecosystem and eventually gets lost as heat. But what about the actual building blocks of life? You know, the nutrients, the atoms themselves. Well, unlike energy, these are not lost. They are endlessly, brilliantly recycled. Let's just pause and think about this for a second. When a tiny little acorn grows into a massive oak tree, where does all that stuff, all that mass actually come from? Is it just sucking it all out of the soil? The answer is pretty amazing, and it lies in two of nature's most elegant recycling systems. Believe it or not, a huge chunk of a tree's mass is pulled right out of thin air. Plants literally breathe in carbon dioxide to build their bodies. That carbon then travels up the food chain when an animal eats the plant, and when organisms breathe or when they decompose, that carbon gets released right back again. It's a perfect loop. The carbon atom in your very next breath might have once been part of a dinosaur. How cool is that? And then you've got nitrogen, which is absolutely essential for making proteins. The air is full of it, but for most living things, it's completely unusable in that form. So who are the heroes here? Bacteria. They are the unsung heroes. You have different types of bacteria working in this incredible, complex sequence. Some fix it from the air, others break it down from waste, others convert it into plant food, and finally, another group releases it back into the atmosphere. It's like a hidden chemical factory running 24/7 right under our feet. So for millions and millions of years, these amazing cycles of energy and nutrients created a dynamic but stable balance. But pretty recently, a new and incredibly powerful force has entered the equation: us.
And our actions have started to disrupt these ancient systems on a truly global scale. 10 billion. Just let that number sink in. That's the projected human population by the year 2050. And that number, right there, is the core reason for the massive disruption we're seeing. As our numbers have just exploded, our demands for food and fuel and space, they've grown right along with them. And that's changing the rules for pretty much every ecosystem on Earth.
So, to feed this growing population, we've turned to things like modern agriculture. We use powerful pesticides to protect our crops so we can get the highest possible yield. But all this efficiency, it comes with a hidden cost. And it's a cost that doesn't really show itself in the field, but way up the food chain.
The problem is a process with a big name, but a simple concept: biomagnification. See, some chemicals, like certain pesticides, they don't break down in nature. Instead, they get stored and they accumulate in the fatty tissues of organisms. And as you move up the food chain, those toxins become more and more and more concentrated. Let's just look at the classic story of the insecticide DDT. A tiny, tiny trace amount in plankton gets magnified at every single step up the food chain. By the time it reaches the top predator, the fish eagle, the concentration is nearly 10 million times higher than where it started. And for those top predators, the effects were absolutely catastrophic. This whole thing just goes to show how our attempts to control nature can completely backfire. Pests evolve resistance, which forces us to use even stronger chemicals. These poisons can then persist in the environment for years, killing beneficial insects we actually need, like bees, all while building up to toxic levels throughout the entire food web. And look, the impact of pesticides is really just one piece of the puzzle. Our influence is now so vast that we are literally altering the fundamental chemistry of our planet's atmosphere, its water, and its land. This is a question I hear all the time, and it's a really good one. The greenhouse effect is totally natural, and honestly, it's essential for life. Without it, Earth would just be a frozen ball of ice. The gases in our atmosphere act like a blanket, trapping some of the sun's heat and keeping the planet warm enough for all of us. The problem isn't the effect itself, it's the fact that we've enhanced it. So here's the issue. Human activities, mostly burning fossil fuels, are releasing massive amounts of extra greenhouse gases into the air, especially carbon dioxide. So we're basically thickening the Earth's natural heat-trapping blanket. And this enhanced effect is what we call global warming, and it's what's knocking our planet's climate way out of its normal balance. This table really just draws the straight lines from our actions to their consequences. And what's wild is you can see how three totally different activities, how we make our power, how we clear our land, and how we grow our food, all end up disrupting the planet's most fundamental systems, from the air we breathe to the water we drink. You know, when you step back and you put all of this together, the conclusion is pretty hard to avoid. In an incredibly short period of time, geologically speaking, our collective actions have made us the single dominant force of change on planet Earth, disrupting cycles that have been stable for millennia. And that really leaves us with a final crucial thought. The question isn't if we have an impact anymore. That's settled. The real question, the one that matters now, is what kind of impact do we choose to have? We understand the systems, we can see the connections, and we can measure what we're doing. The only question left is what we decide to do with all that knowledge.